Slavery didn't end in 1865. It just changed its name, and one woman spent 45 years proving it. She documented everything, from chains to contracts, from masters to laws. And when she finally exposed it, they tried to erase her. But the truth was already written down. Long before she ever spoke publicly, she learned something dangerous. Memory fades, but writing doesn't. Sarah Whitaker was born in 1844 on a plantation that never changed its rules. Red Hollow Estate, deep in the bayou, where heat clung to your skin and silence kept you alive. By the time she was 5, she already understood the system. Not the laws, the reality. Who could speak, who couldn't, who could look up, and who had to look down. Her mother worked in the big house, cooking, cleaning, moving through rooms without ever being seen. And Sarah followed, not because she chose to, because she was expected to. That's where she learned her first skill. Observation. She watched everything, not openly, carefully. The way voices changed, depending on who was in the room. The way orders were given, without being explained. The way children learned cruelty, just by watching their parents. By 8, she saw something she wasn't supposed to. Letters, written across a slate. Simple shapes, but they meant something. She stared too long, and someone noticed. A tutor, young, careless, or maybe brave. Instead of sending her away, she whispered one question. Do you want to learn? That moment changed everything, because learning to read was forbidden. Learning to write, even worse. If anyone found out, she would be punished, possibly sold, separated forever. But they did it anyway. Early mornings, before anyone woke, in silence, letters became words. Words became sentences, and sentences became power. Because once you could read, you could understand. And once you could write, you could remember. When the lessons stopped, she didn't. She found scraps, paper thrown away, pieces of old ledgers, anything she could hide. And she began writing. Not stories. Not thoughts. Facts. Dates. What happened? Who it happened to? And who did it? The first entry was simple. A man sold. A family left behind. A price written down. And a detail no one else would ever record. What it sounded like. The crying. The silence after. The way life continued, as if nothing had happened. That's what made her different. She didn't record events. She recorded truth. Over the years, the pages grew, hidden under floorboards, inside walls, buried in places no one would think to look. She wrote through everything. The war, the soldiers, the moment freedom was announced, and the moment she realized nothing had really changed. The chains were gone, but something else replaced them. Contracts, debt, laws that looked different, but worked the same. And still, she kept writing. Because by then, it wasn't a risk anymore. It was a purpose. She wasn't just surviving. She was building a record. One day, she would use it. Not to escape, but to expose everything. And after 45 years, that moment finally came. When the war ended, people said everything had changed. Freedom. That was the word. Spoken by soldiers. Written into law. Promised to everyone. For the first time, she saw it. Black men in uniform, walking through the plantation, not as property, as soldiers, carrying rifles, giving orders, and for a moment, the world felt different. People left, walked off the land, toward something no one had ever seen before. But most stayed. Not because they wanted to, because they had nowhere else to go. No land, no money, no way to survive. So the system changed. Not disappeared. Changed. The same fields, the same houses, the same people in charge. But now, it had new rules. Contracts. You work the land. You get a share. That was the promise. But the numbers never worked. Debt grew. Faster than wages. Food came from the plantation store, charged at prices no one could argue. Tools, clothes, everything added to the ledger. And at the end of the season, you owed more than you earned. Which meant you couldn't leave. Not legally owned, but not free either. She wrote it all down. Not just what happened, how it worked, names of contracts, numbers and ledgers, the language they used to hide what they were doing. And outside the fields, something else was growing. Violence. Not public, not official, but everywhere. Men in masks, riding at night, knocking on doors, dragging people out, for voting, for speaking, for existing, the wrong way. She recorded that too. Names, dates, what was said, what was done, what was left behind. Because by then, she understood something clearly. Freedom wasn't taken away all at once. It was chipped away, piece by piece, until nothing remained, except the word itself. For a few years, there was hope. Schools opened. Children learned to read. People voted, spoke, believed, and she wrote that too. Because truth isn't just suffering. It's contrast. What was possible, and what was destroyed. Then, it ended, not with a battle, but with silence. The soldiers left, the protection disappeared, and the system closed in again. Faster this time, more organized, more careful. Laws changed, but the result didn't. People stopped voting, schools closed. Work stayed the same, but the pressure increased. And now, there was no one watching. That's when she realized what all of this really was. Not failure. Not chaos. A transition. From one system to another. Same purpose, different form. And no one was documenting it. Not officially, not honestly. Except her. By the time she was in her 40s, she had 45 years of records, everything. From slavery to something that looked like freedom, but wasn't. And that's when the question changed. Not, should I keep writing, but, what happens if no one ever reads this?
Because truth, hidden forever, is the same as truth that never existed. And after 45 years, she made a decision. She wasn't going to die with this still hidden. She was going to say it, all of it. Out loud.
Once she made the decision, there was no going back. Because speaking the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was fatal. She knew that. Everyone knew that. In places like this, truth didn't get argued. It got silenced. Permanently. She didn't announce it, didn't tell many people, only the ones she trusted. And even then, not everything. Because if they were questioned, they couldn't reveal what they didn't know. That was the rule she had lived by for 45 years. Now, it was the rule that might keep her alive. Or at least, keep the truth alive. She started organizing the notebooks. Not rewriting. Not editing. Just arranging. Chronological. Names grouped together. Events connected. So that anyone listening could follow it. From beginning to end. Because this wasn't a story. It was a record. And records don't need embellishment. They just need to be heard. She practiced reading. Alone. Late at night. Not to sound better. To make sure she didn't stop. Because she knew, once she started, she couldn't hesitate. Couldn't break. Couldn't soften anything. 7 hours. That's what it would take. 7 hours of saying everything. Out loud. Her husband understood. He didn't try to stop her. Didn't argue. Because he knew this wasn't a choice anymore. It was the result of everything she had seen. Everything she had written. Everything she refused to forget. They talked about the risks. Not in detail. They didn't need to. Both of them knew how this ended. So they prepared. She sent the children away. Not far, but far enough. Somewhere safer. Somewhere they wouldn't be found first. She separated the notebooks. Not all in one place. Some with her. Some hidden. Some already sent. To people who could publish them. Because if she failed, the truth couldn't. That was the priority now. Not survival. Preservation. The night before, she didn't sleep. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Every moment felt precise. Final. She sat with the notebooks. Ran her hands over the pages. 45 years. Every name. Every voice. That had never been heard. And she understood something. This wasn't just her story. It never was. It belonged to everyone who had been erased, forgotten, rewritten. And tomorrow, they would all be heard. For the first time. Out loud. She wrote one last entry. Not long. Not detailed. Just a statement. Clear. Final. Tomorrow, I speak. I know what this means. I know what will come after. But silence is the same as surrender. And I have never surrendered. Morning came, like any other. Quiet. Normal. That's what made it dangerous. Because nothing on the outside showed what was about to happen. A church. A gathering. People coming to listen. Some out of support. Some out of curiosity. Some to see how it would end. She walked in, carrying everything, not just the notebooks, the weight of 45 years. And when she reached the front, she didn't hesitate, didn't look back, didn't wait. She opened the first page, took a breath, and began. She didn't start with anger. She started with facts. A date. A name. A transaction. Someone sold. Someone left behind. No commentary. No emotion. Just the record. At first, the room was quiet. Not tense. Just listening. People expected a story. Something dramatic. Something easy to follow. But that's not what she gave them. She gave them reality. Unfiltered. Uncomfortable. And impossible to ignore. Entry after entry, she read. Names. Dates. Events that had never been spoken publicly. Families separated. People beaten. People taken at night and never seen again. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. And something changed. The room stopped reacting. Stopped shifting. Stopped whispering. Because the pattern became clear. This wasn't a collection of stories. This was a system. One that had never stopped. Only changed its shape. She moved forward. Into the war years. Describing freedom. The way she had written it. Not as a moment. As a confusion. People standing in the same place, but told everything was different. Some in the room nodded. Others looked down because they recognized it. Or didn't want to. Then came reconstruction. And for the first time, her voice changed. Not louder. Not emotional. Clearer. Sharper. Because this part mattered most. She described hope. Schools opening. People voting. Children learning to read. A future that almost existed. And then, she described how it ended. Not with a war. With decisions. Policies. Men choosing to let it die. That's when people started reacting again. Not quietly. Not carefully. Some cried. Openly. Others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. 3 men stood up and walked out. Not in protest. In anger. Because they heard names, recognized them. Fathers. Brothers. Men they knew. And she didn't stop. Didn't acknowledge them, didn't slow down. Because the record didn't stop for anyone. 2 hours. 3. 4. Time stopped mattering. Only the words remained. Only the truth. By midnight, the room had changed completely. The room had changed completely. No one came for curiosity anymore. They stayed, because they had to hear it end. Because once you heard enough, you couldn't walk away. The journalists stopped taking breaks, writing constantly, every word, because they understood this wasn't just testimony. This was evidence. And evidence forces action, or exposes inaction. As the hours passed, her voice never broke, never slowed, even when she reached the hardest parts. The killings, the disappearances, the things people pretended didn't happen. She read them all, exactly as she had written them, because changing anything would make it easier to ignore. At some point, no one was just listening anymore. They were witnessing something undeniable, something permanent. And when she reached the final pages, the room was silent again. Not the same silence as before. Heavier, aware. She closed the last notebook, looked up, and for a moment, no one moved. No applause, no sound. Just the weight of everything they had heard. Then, someone began to cry. Quietly, then louder, then others, until the room couldn't hold it anymore, because what she had done was impossible to undo. The truth had been spoken, and now it belonged to everyone who heard it. But she understood something they didn't. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of what would come next. For a few days, nothing happened. No response. No official statement. Just silence. But silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something is being decided. The newspapers printed it first. Not all of it, not yet. But enough. Excerpts, names, dates, fragments of what she had read. And that was enough. Because once it was written, it couldn't be contained. People started talking. In towns. In cities. In places far from the bayou, where they thought things were different. Some were shocked. Others weren't. Because they had seen pieces of it, heard rumors. But this was proof, organized, documented, impossible to dismiss as exaggeration. And that made it dangerous. Not just for the people named, but for the system itself. Because systems survive by controlling the narrative. And she had just taken that control away. 3 months passed. Long enough for attention to spread, long enough for anger to settle into something colder. More deliberate. Then one night, they came, no warning, no announcement. Just movement in the dark. Her house was set on fire. Fast, controlled, designed to erase everything inside. Neighbors saw it, too late. By the time anyone reached the door, it was already done. Sarah Whitaker was gone. And for a moment, it worked. The voice was gone, the source, silenced. But they made a mistake. They thought the truth was in the house. It wasn't, not all of it, because she had already planned for this. Months before the testimony, she had separated the records, sent copies, hidden others, placed them in hands that wouldn't give them back. So when the house burned, the truth didn't. It moved from one place to many. Newspapers picked it up, writers expanded it, publishers distributed it. Not perfectly, not completely. But enough. Enough that it couldn't be erased. Because once something is documented, in enough places, it stops being vulnerable. It becomes permanent. Years later, people would find parts of her work, fragments, hidden notebooks, pages tucked into walls. And they would think, how did this survive? The answer was simple. She never relied on one place or one moment. She built something that could outlast her. A record, not of one event, but of a system. From beginning to transformation. to continuation. And that's what made it powerful. Not the emotion. Not the story. The consistency. The detail. The fact that it never stopped. Even when everything else changed. Sarah Whitaker didn't survive. But her work did. And in the end, that's what mattered. Because systems like this don't fear anger. They don't fear resistance. They don't even fear exposure. If it can be denied. What they fear is record. Something written. Something provable. Something that exists, whether they acknowledge it or not. And for 45 years, she made sure of that. So when they tried to erase her, they couldn't. Because by then, she wasn't just a person anymore. She was evidence. And evidence doesn't disappear.